So in this section, we're going to be talking about the Arabian Nights, and what this text, the story collection, allows us to think about is storytelling itself. Now, we've encountered other storytellers and scenes of storytelling in the other texts we've discussed so far, including our first text, the Epic of Gilgamesh, where we were introduced to Utanapishtim, who tells Gilgamesh the story of the flood. And at least for modern readers, the flood is probably the most famous part of the Epic of Gilgamesh because it reminds us that the biblical story of the flood had an older Sumerian ancestor. The second and probably more famous storyteller is Odysseus. Many of the most famous episodes of the Odyssey are told by Odysseus himself, who is at the court of the Phaeacians and who must convince his hosts to help him return to his home in Ithaca. And at the court, he tells some of the most famous stories, like his encounter with the sirens, his encounter with the one-eyed Cyclops, and so on and so forth. So here, Odysseus himself is a storyteller. It's not just Homer, but his most famous character, Odysseus. But if we were to come up with a ranking of the most famous storytellers, if we wanted to settle on a patron saint of storytelling, most people would probably not think of Utanapishtim, nor would they think of Odysseus, though Odysseus is a famous storyteller and, one should add, a famous liar. Most people, I think, would think of Scheherazade. And that, of course, is the storyteller of the most famous frame of all story collection, the Arabian Nights. As everybody knows, night after night, Scheherazade must come up with new stories in order to keep the king hooked. Because the king has sworn to kill all companions after just one night. And here Scheherazade finds herself trying to postpone that terrible moment through storytelling, trying to keep the king hooked from cliffhanger to cliffhanger. That certainly ups the ante on all storytellers, and it's probably one reason why this frame of the Arabian Nights is the most important frame. It's a frame tale narrative. That's the genre we use to describe frame tale collections such as the Arabian Nights. The Arabian Nights are not the only frame tale narrative. There are many others, including and especially Persian and Indian predecessors. But Scheherazade is the most famous storyteller of them all. Now, Scheherazade must come up with new stories every night in order to survive. But she must do something else. Because if she just keeps the king hooked night after night, she will be trapped forever. So over the course of these many nights, she has a second goal, a second task, and that is to re-educate the king. Because the king has gone quite mad. He discovered his wife's infidelities and was so struck by that he first runs away, roams the countryside, not knowing what to do, and finally he returns and swears that he will kill all women after spending just one night with them. And this, of course, wrecks the kingdom. The king is killing all marriageable women, and the kingdom is falling apart. So Scheherazade must save not only herself and her fellow women, but really the entire realm, and therefore must educate the king, teach the king how to be king again. And this, interestingly enough, is actually not so different from the two other previous texts we've discussed, the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Odyssey. Because the Epic of Gilgamesh starts with Gilgamesh sleeping with women, whoever he wants, and being a terrible king. And it's only by the very end of that epic that he learns how to be a proper king of Uruk. Something related happens in the Odyssey, which begins in Ithaca, where the suitors demand that a new king be instituted because they're tired of waiting for Odysseus to come home. They've been waiting for many years, and there's a political crisis. And by the end of that epic, Odysseus, of course, returns and asserts himself as a king, and political order is restored. Something related happens in the Arabian Nights, where a political crisis has to be addressed. And the way it is addressed is through storytelling. And indeed, many of the stories Scheherazade tells revolve around good kings and governance. One of the most important kings in these stories is the famous Caliph of Baghdad, Harun al-Rashid. The stories that feature Harun al-Rashid are often called the Arabic core of this story collection. Other tales come from other parts of the world, from Persia, from India, from elsewhere. But the Arabic core of the stories feature Harun al-Rashid, who is a good king. And it is in part by hoping to hold that example before the king's eye that Scheherazade hopes to restore him to his senses and to teach him how to become a good king again. Now, Harun al-Rashid is important in another way as well. As the Caliph of Baghdad, he created the first paper factory in the Arabic world. Paper was not invented in the Arabic world, it was invented in China and ultimately traveled via the Silk Road to the Arabic world. But there it was adopted, and Harun al-Rashid was an important part of that story, and it transformed literature in the Arabic world. Paper was much easier to make than papyrus or parchment. It therefore lowered the cost of producing literature, and that was perfect for something like the Arabian Nights. Because the Arabian Nights were not high literature. They were a more popular form of literature geared towards townspeople and merchants. And in fact, townspeople and merchants often feature prominently in its pages. Many of the stories, even though some feature kings like Harun al-Rashid, often revolve around common people. And it is therefore a more popular kind of literature. And this kind of literature managed to thrive only when the cost of producing literature, and therefore the barriers of access to literature, were lowered, and paper, the introduction of paper into the Arabic world, played an important part in that story. So paper and the Arabian Nights managed to thrive together. Indeed, the very earliest fragment of the Arabian Nights we have comes from the 9th century and is on a scrap of paper that shows the title page of the Arabian Nights and the beginning of its famous frame story. Paper made the production of literature cheaper. It also allowed it to travel more widely because it's so thin and easy to carry around. So paper really set the stage for the Arabian Nights to travel all around the Arabic world and ultimately to Europe.